He didn't believe in coincidences, but that night changed everything. Ryan Cole stood at the edge of the crowded wedding hall, glass in hand, unaware that within the next few seconds, the life he'd carefully built around silence and control would start to crack. Before the story unfolds, make sure to like, comment, and share to keep seeing amazing stories like this. Stories that make you feel, question, and remember. The sound of laughter echoed through the golden-lit room, but it barely reached him. Weddings weren't his kind of place. Too many promises, too many reminders of everything temporary. He'd almost declined the invitation, but Daniel, his oldest friend, wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to show your face, man," Daniel had said. "You've been buried in concrete and contract for years. Come breathe a little." And so here he was, tie loose, smile forced, glass half empty, surrounded by strangers who believed love lasted forever. Then he saw her, Ava Monroe. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. She was standing near the dessert table, laughing softly with another guest, a strand of hair falling over her face the same way it always used to when she painted. Ryan's chest tightened before his mind could even catch up. 6 years. That's how long it had been since he'd last seen her, since their final argument, when she told him she couldn't keep loving someone who loved ambition more than her. He'd left that night without looking back, believing that work would fill the space she left behind. But as she stood there now, alive in color against a room of blur, all those years of progress collapsed like weak scaffolding. And then he noticed the little girl. She was holding Ava's hand, clutching it like it was her anchor in a sea of unfamiliar faces. The child looked no older than 5, a swirl of soft curls and curious eyes that locked, for a fleeting second, with his. Blue, the exact shade of blue that used to stare back at him in the mirror every morning. Ryan blinked. A strange heat crawled under his collar. The noise of the wedding dulled into a single hum. The child tilted her head slightly, studying him with the unguarded curiosity only children possess. Then, without understanding why, he took a step forward. Ava saw him. The laughter vanished from her face. Her hand tightened around the girl's. In one swift movement, she turned, whispering something into the child's ear, and guided her toward the exit. Ryan froze where he stood, his breath shallow. The distance between them, a few feet of polished marble, felt like a canyon carved by years of regret. He watched them disappear through the double doors, her figure illuminated briefly by the hallway lights before fading. He told himself it couldn't be. Coincidence. That's all it was. A child with similar eyes. That's how genetics worked. Random, meaningless resemblances. But denial had a short half-life. He left the reception early, offering Daniel a quick excuse about a client emergency, though his friend barely heard him over the music. Outside, Chicago's night air was damp and cool, the city lights painting the pavement in streaks of gold and gray. He walked his car in silence, the image of that child replaying like a haunting slideshow. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. His mind wrestled between memory and logic, the impossible tug-of-war of what-ifs. He remembered the last words Ava had said before he walked away. You think love is something you can pause and come back to. One day, you'll understand it doesn't wait. He'd understood too late. By morning, logic lost a fight. He drove to a cafe near the lake, the same one they used to visit back when life still felt soft around the edges. He sat there for hours, replaying every possible timeline, every choice he could have made differently. Then he made one more, reckless, maybe desperate, but something in him needed to know. That afternoon, he called a discreet DNA lab, the kind that promised privacy and delivered certainty. It sounded insane even to him, but so did everything about that night. He didn't have anything of the girl's except memory, until he remembered the glass. He'd seen her holding a small water glass at the wedding table, her tiny fingerprints smudged along the rim. It would still be there. By the time he drove back to the venue, the cleanup crew was stacking chairs and rolling up white linens. He scanned the tables until he saw it, one small, forgotten glass beside a half-eaten piece of cake. His pulse quickened as he slipped it into a napkin and tucked it inside his jacket. Every logical part of his mind screamed this was madness. But another part, older, quieter, and far more human, whispered something else. What if she's yours? That night, He sealed the glass in a small plastic bag and drove it to the lab's drop box, each red light on the way feeling like judgment. He didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel. Not his assistant. Not even his reflection. 3 days passed like years. He checked his phone compulsively, barely focusing at work. The waiting gnawed at him. He thought of Ava's eyes that night, the way they'd flickered with guilt and something he couldn't name. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe she'd built a new life, one that didn't need him. But if that child was his, then he had a right to know, didn't he? Or was that just his guilt dressing up as responsibility? When the results finally arrived, his hands trembled as he opened the email. 99.9% match. He read it twice. Then again, the words didn't change. The certainty in black and white burned through his chest like cold fire. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the weight of 5 lost years pressing down like concrete. He thought of her, of Ava, alone through nights and mornings he never knew existed, of the child's first steps, first words, first birthday, moments that should have been his, stolen by silence and pride. Somewhere between shock and heartbreak, he started to cry, not the loud, messy kind, but the quiet kind that leaves you hollow. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. He needed to see her, not to accuse, not to demand, but to understand. He dressed in jeans and a plain shirt, leaving behind the polished version of himself that belonged to glass offices and blueprints. The address came easily. He'd never forgotten it, though he'd tried. Her art studio was downtown, near the edge of an old district filled with galleries and bookshops. He parked across the street, watching through the window as she guided a small class of children through a painting lesson. And there she was, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, her hands moving gently as she helped a boy fix his brushstroke. She looked softer than he remembered, stronger, too, like someone who had rebuilt herself out of the ruins he left behind. And there was Lily, sitting at a small table, painting a bright yellow sun, humming quietly to herself. Ryan stayed in his car, unseen, unable to move. He realized with a sharp ache that he'd already missed too much to ever make it right. But maybe he could still try. He opened the car door and stepped out, the wind carrying the scent of paint and morning rain. He was done hiding. He hesitated at the studio door, hand trembling against the glass. Through the window, Ryan watched Ava help one of the children clean a paintbrush, her movements slow, patient. She looked at peace. He wondered if his presence would shatter that, just as she'd shattered his composure at the wedding. The bell above the door chimed softly when he pushed it open. The smell of acrylics and paper filled the air, familiar, nostalgic. Ava looked up, and for a fleeting moment, the brush in her hand stilled. Surprise flickered in her eyes. Then something colder settled in its place. Ryan. His name left her lips like an old memory she didn't want to revisit. He swallowed. Hi. The children looked up curious, and Ava quickly smiled at them, that careful teacher's smile that hid emotion behind calm authority. Keep painting, guys. I'll be right back. She walked toward him, her steps soft against the wooden floor. Up close, the years were visible, not unkindly, but in the quiet strength around her eyes, the steadiness in her posture. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice even controlled. I needed to see you, he said quietly. After the wedding, you shouldn't have come. The words hit him harder than they should have. He glanced past her, to the small table near the corner. Lily sat there, tongue between her teeth, painting a bright blue sky. Her small hand moved with focus. Ryan's heart clenched. She's yours, isn't she? His voice broke the silence. Ava froze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned, closing the studio door behind her and facing him fully. We're not doing this here, she whispered. Not in front of her. Then tell me where, he said. Her eyes hardened. Later, after class. Ryan nodded, stepping back. I'll wait. He sat in his car for the next hour, watching the rain trace slow lines down the windshield. He thought about every choice that led to this moment. Every word left unsaid, every apology never made. When the studio lights dimmed and the children filed out one by one, Ava finally emerged, locking the door behind her. She didn't look at him right away, just said, "There's a cafe around the corner. We can talk there." Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and sugar. They sat in a booth by the window. Ryan couldn't stop glancing at her, her hands wrapped around the mug, the small paint stain near her wrist. "I did a test," he said finally. "A DNA test." Her eyes snapped up to his. "I had to know," he continued. "And it came back 99.9%. Ava's breath caught, the faintest sound of surrender escaping her lips. She didn't deny it, didn't even try. She just sat there, silent. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but rough. "Why didn't you tell me?" She stared down at the steam rising from her cup. "You left, Ryan. You were gone before I even knew. And when I did, I told myself it was better that way." "Better for who?" "For her," Ava said sharply. Then, softer, "And maybe for me. I was scared. You were ambitious, always chasing something else. I couldn't risk being another thing you'd walk away from." He exhaled shakily, rubbing his forehead. "You should have trusted me." "Trusted you." She let out a bitter laugh. "You don't even know what that means. You think showing up now makes you a father? You think 5 years of absence can be erased by guilt." He flinched, but didn't argue. "You're right," he said. "Nothing I say can change what I missed. I want to know her. I want to try." Ava looked at him for a long time, eyes glistening. "She doesn't know who you are. To her, you're just a stranger who stared too long at a wedding." "Then let me change that," he said, slowly, "however you want." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. "She's my life, Ryan. Every decision I've made since she was born has been about keeping her safe. If you hurt her—" "I won't," he said, cutting in softly. "You have my word." Silence settled between them again. A song played faintly from the cafe speakers, something slow, melancholy. Ava finally nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Art class. Saturdays at 10. If you really mean it, show up." Ryan's chest tightened. "I will." She looked back at him then, really looked, like she was searching for the truth in his face. Whatever she saw there made her sigh, not of forgiveness, but of resignation. "I don't know what this will look like," she murmured. "But if you're serious, don't make promises you can't keep." He didn't answer. He just watched her gather her things, the soft clink of her keys breaking the stillness. When she stood, she said one last thing before walking away. She deserves love that stays. When she left the cafe, Ryan sat alone for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from him. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still felt heavy. He leaned back, eyes closed, hearing her words over and over, "Love that stays." It was strange how simple they sounded, yet how impossible they'd once felt. Later that night, he drove home through quiet streets, headlights gliding over puddles. He thought about Lily's small hands, the way her eyes mirrored his. He imagined her laughter, her questions, the way she might one day ask where he'd been all this time. He didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find them. He reached his apartment and stood by the window, watching the city stretch below, bright, distant, untouchable. It had always been enough for him before. Now it just felt empty. He opened his phone, scrolling through old pictures until he found one of Ava, taken years ago, when they were still young and foolish. She was laughing then, holding a paintbrush up like a sword, color smeared across her cheek. He smiled faintly. "I'll make this right," he whispered to the quiet room, "even if it takes the rest of my life." Outside, the city lights blurred through the glass like falling stars. And somewhere across town, a little girl was being tucked into bed by the mother who had once loved him, and who, despite everything, still haunted every heartbeat he had left. That night, Ryan didn't sleep. But for the first time, he wasn't restless. He was waiting for morning, for redemption, for the smallest chance to be part of something worth staying for. Saturday came with the kind of pale sunlight that slips gently through clouds. Ryan parked a short distance from the art studio, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart racing faster than he'd like to admit. He had no idea what he was supposed to say, or even whether Ava would let him stay. But a promise was a promise. He'd spent 5 years hiding behind deadlines, projects, and excuses. This time he would show up. Through the window, he could see the familiar chaos of children's art day. Paintbrushes clattered. Laughter filled the air. Tiny hands reached for colors brighter than the world outside. And there, near the window, sat Lily, small, focused, and humming softly as she painted. Ryan stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. His reflection flashed across the glass door, just as Ava appeared from behind one of the easels. She saw him immediately. There was no surprise in her eyes this time, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if she'd expected he might come but hadn't decided how she felt about it yet. He opened the door slowly. The children barely noticed him, too busy painting their imagined worlds. Ava nodded toward an empty stool near the back. "If you're staying," she said evenly, "you can help clean brushes." He smiled faintly. "Got it." The next hour passed in careful silence. Ryan washed brushes, arranged jars of water, and handed out paper towels. Sometimes Lily would glance at him curiously, the way children look at someone they think they've seen before but can't quite remember where. Once, she caught his eyes and smiled, a small, unguarded smile that sent a tremor straight through him. Ava noticed. She said nothing. When class ended, parents trickled in to collect their children. Lily skipped toward Ava, holding her painting high. "Look, Mommy," she said proudly. "I painted a sky with 2 suns." Ava crouched to admire it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Ryan stood a few feet away, pretending not to listen, but Lily turned to him suddenly, holding the paper out. "Do you like it?" He crouched to her level. "I think it's amazing," he said softly. 2 suns, huh? That's a big imagination." She grinned. "It means the world gets more light." For a second, he couldn't speak. Something about her innocence, her joy. It cracked something inside him. When Lily ran off to gather her things, Ava walked over, crossed her arms. "She doesn't understand who you are," she said. "I know," Ryan replied quietly. "I'm not trying to confuse her. I just wanted to see her smile." Ava hesitated, torn between anger and exhaustion. "You'll make it harder when you leave again." "I'm not leaving," he said simply. "Not this time." She looked at him, searching for truth in his voice. Maybe she saw something real there, because her shoulders eased slightly. "Fine, but don't expect anything from me." "I won't," he said. "Just let me be around." Over the next few weeks, he kept coming. Every Saturday morning, he was there. Sometimes early enough to sweep the floors, sometimes late enough to catch only the end of class. But he came. He didn't push conversation with Ava, didn't try to force connection with Lily. He just showed up quietly, steadily, like sunlight through a half-open window. Lily started greeting him with a wave. "Hi, brush cleaner," she'd say with a laugh. And he'd wave back, playing along. One day she asked him to help her mix colors, and he found himself kneeling beside her tiny easel, showing her how blue and yellow made green. Her laughter came easily, like water spilling from a glass too full. Ava pretended not to watch, but she always did. Every stolen glance betrayed something she didn't want to admit. That part of her wanted to believe he'd changed. One afternoon, after class, Ryan noticed one of the wooden shelves wobbling dangerously. He grabbed a small toolbox from his car. He always carried one, old habits from his construction days, and started fixing it while Ava packed supplies. "You don't have to," she said without looking at him. "I know," he replied, tightening a screw, "but I want to." She sighed. "You always did need to fix things." He looked up at her, eyes tired but sincere. "Some things still can be." Ava froze for a second, her hands stilling over a pile of brushes. The air between them grew heavy with everything unspoken. Then she turned away. "It's getting late. Lock up when you're done." When she left, Ryan stood alone in the quiet studio, the scent of paint thick in the air. He looked around at the small, colorful chaos she'd built for herself. It was warm, alive, the opposite of his sterile office life. For the first time in years, he realized how lonely success had become. The next Saturday, Lily's birthday arrived. He wasn't sure if Ava would invite him, but that morning, when he walked into the studio, There were balloons everywhere and a small crowd of children gathered around cupcakes. Ava saw him by the door. She hesitated, then nodded toward the back, where an empty chair waited. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was permission. Lily ran toward him, her face bright. "You came." He smiled, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Wouldn't miss it." She grabbed his hand without hesitation and pulled him toward the table of presents. "I drew you something," she said proudly, handing him a small folded paper. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands, a woman, a man, and a little girl standing between them. Above it, she had written, in crooked letters, "Happy Day." Ryan's throat tightened. He blinked rapidly, forcing a smile. "It's perfect," he whispered. Ava watched him across the room, uncertain. For a moment, she saw not the man who left, but the one who might stay. The one who built dollhouses instead of walls, who knelt to tie shoelaces instead of hiding behind pride. After the candles were blown out and the laughter faded, Ryan handed Lily a small box wrapped in brown paper. She tore it open eagerly to find a tiny wooden jewelry box with her initials carved on top. "Did you make this?" she asked, eyes wide. He nodded. "Took me all week." She opened it and gasped. Inside lay a single small silver charm shaped like a sun. "So you'll always have light," he said softly. She threw her arms around his neck without hesitation, and he froze. Then hugged her back carefully, as if afraid she might vanish if he held too tight. When he looked up, Ava was watching them. Her expression was unreadable, part pain, part wonder. That evening, when the studio emptied, she walked over quietly. "She likes you," she said. "I like her too," he replied. Ava studied him for a long moment. "You're making this harder than I thought it would be." He smiled sadly. "I'm not trying to make anything hard. I'm just trying to make it right." She didn't answer. She only looked at him for a second longer before whispering, "You can stay a little longer next time." Ryan nodded, heart heavy with gratitude. He didn't dare speak. As he walked out into the fading sunset, he glanced back through the glass. Ava was cleaning up the last of the decorations, her figure framed in warm light, and Lily was twirling around the studio floor, humming some tune of her own making. For the first time in 6 years, Ryan felt something inside him ease, like the sound of a door unlocking quietly after too long. He knew the road ahead would be slow, uncertain, maybe painful, but at least now he wasn't walking alone. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't just want to fix what he'd broken. He wanted to stay long enough to build something new. The following months unfolded quietly, like a melody that no longer needed to prove itself. Ryan kept coming, sometimes to help, sometimes to just be there. Ava stopped counting his appearances. He'd become part of the rhythm, the sound of keys in the door, the scent of coffee before class began. Lily, bright as ever, drew him into a small world with questions only a 5-year-old could ask. Why clouds move faster than cars? Why grown-ups said sorry more than they smiled? One morning, a soft drizzle tapped the windows as Ryan fixed a wobbly shelf at the studio. Ava leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You've turned this place into your workshop," she teased. He smiled without looking up. "You keep finding things that need fixing. Maybe I'm doing it on purpose." He glanced at her then, eyes warm. "Then keep doing it." The air between them held more comfort than tension now. Words at once cut now stitched small moments together. He didn't rush her forgiveness. He earned it by staying. Lily's laughter became his favorite sound. She'd tug on his sleeve when she wanted him to see a painting, her voice bright with pride. One afternoon, she drew 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun and proudly taped it to the wall. "That's us," she said. "Mommy, me, and my helper." Ava turned away quickly, pretending to rearrange brushes, but her eyes glistened. Later, when Ryan lingered by the painting, she said softly, "She doesn't call you Dad yet." He nodded. "She will when she's ready. I'm in no hurry." And he meant it. Patience had replaced the urgency that once defined him. The man who'd once chased success was now learning to stand still. Weeks later, Ava received an invitation to showcase her students' work at a local art fair. It was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, but the timeline was impossible. They want 6 displays in 2 weeks, she muttered, pacing the studio. And I have nothing ready. I'll build the stands, Ryan said immediately. She hesitated. You don't have to. I want to. They spent the following nights in the studio, surrounded by paint, wood, and the hum of quiet determination. They argued a few times about placement, colors, the smallest details, but each disagreement ended with laughter instead of silence. One evening, when he was tightening bolts, Ava watched him and said softly, "You look different when you work now." He paused. Different how? Less like you're trying to prove something. More like you're home. The fair arrived on a cloudless morning. Children ran between displays, their laughter echoing. Lily stood proudly beside her painting. The rain that sparkles, explaining her technique to anyone who would listen. A photographer asked for a picture, and she grabbed both Ava and Ryan's hands, pulling them close. Stand here. We're a team. The camera flashed, and in that single second, everything felt right. That night, as they cleaned up, Ryan found a small folded note under one of the tables. It was old, the edges soft with time. Ava's handwriting covered the front. If only you had stayed. She froze when she saw it in his hands. I wrote that years ago, she said quietly. I almost sent it, then decided you'd moved on. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, I'm staying now. The words hung there, fragile but real. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his. Don't say it if it's just guilt. It's not guilt, he whispered. It's gratitude for a second chance. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. Days turned into weeks. They slipped into a new kind of routine. Soft, real, built from the ordinary. Ryan helped with dinner sometimes. Stayed late to read bedtime stories. Learned which lullabies Lily liked best. He found her silver charm, shaped like a tiny sun, on his desk one night with a note in crayon. Keep it when you miss us. He tucked it into his pocket and never left home without it. Ava noticed. She saw the steadiness, the gentleness, the way Lily looked for him in every crowd. One night, after class, she said quietly, You've done what I didn't think you could. What's that? Stay. He smiled. Guess I needed something worth staying for. A month later, Ava's studio hosted a small evening exhibition to thank the community. Strings of lights hung across the courtyard, and laughter floated through the air. Daniel showed up with his wife, grinning. Never thought I'd see you covered in glitter, man, he joked, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. Ryan just smiled. Guess people change. When the night slowed and most guests had gone, Lily climbed onto the small wooden stage and cleared her throat. Can I say something? She asked, clutching a piece of paper. Ava and Ryan nodded. My mom always told me art is about love, she began. But I think it's also about people who come back. She pointed at Ryan, beaming. Like him. The crowd chuckled softly. Ava covered her mouth, tears shining. Ryan couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just listened as Lily added, So I think we should all clap for people who try again. The applause that followed was gentle but deep, filling the night with warmth. Ryan crouched and hugged her tightly, whispering, Thank you, sunshine. She whispered back, You're not my helper anymore. You're my dad. Ava's hands trembled where she stood. Ryan looked up at her, eyes wet, and for a long second, everything, every lost year, every painful silence, fell away. Time passed. The world turned softer. One morning, while helping Ava hang a new sign outside the studio, Ryan caught her watching him. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. There's something I need to ask you, she said. Ask away. Do you believe in do-overs? He chuckled. I think I'm living one. She took his hand. Then, maybe it's time we stop calling it that. The following weekend, they gathered a few close friends in the courtyard where it had all begun. There were no decorations, no grand gestures, just a handful of wildflowers, a borrowed speaker, and Lily in a white dress scattering petals with fierce concentration. When Ava reached him, she took both his hands and said softly, I spent years trying to forget you. Then you came back and reminded me what love looks like when it's quiet. He smiled through tears. I can't give you back the time I stole, but I'll spend whatever's left building what we should have started. Their vows were simple, honest. No apologies, no promises of perfection, just presence. As they kiss, Lily cheered louder than everyone. "Finally!" she shouted, making everyone laugh. Later that night, when the courtyard had emptied and the world was still, Lily pinned a new drawing to the studio wall. 3 figures again, this time under a bright yellow sun with the words "my family" written carefully across the top. Ryan stood there, tracing the lines of the drawing with his eyes. Ava slipped her hand into his, her shoulder brushing his. Neither spoke. Outside, the wind lifted gently, moving the edges of the paper like a heartbeat. He felt the silver charm warm against his palm and understood what it meant now. Not light that drives away darkness, but light that stays through it. Ava leaned her head against him and whispered, "Home looks good on you." He smiled, eyes soft, watching Lily twirl beneath the glow of the hanging lights. "It looks good on us." The night faded into quiet laughter and distant city sounds. For the first time in 6 years, Ryan felt whole. Not because he'd been forgiven, but because he'd learned that love, when rebuilt slowly and truthfully, doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks that you stay. And this time, he did. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share so more people can discover stories like this. Stories about second chances, healing, and the power of love that stays.